Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Indie Filmmaking Truth and Reality. I'm your host, Jeff Deverett, and today we have a very interesting subject. We are going to talk about how to protect your idea, the rights to your idea and your idea. Everybody who comes up with an idea, especially writers, are worried that somebody's going to steal it if they share it with somebody. So I'm going to tell you the legal realities of that and the practical reality on how to do it. If you want to be a successful indie filmmaker, you need to know a lot about not just the production of movies, but the business. We are going to tell you the truth and reality of what really happens in the indie film business. Okay, here we go. Let's talk about protecting your idea. Before I get into that though, as you know, after every episode, I invite my listeners to ask me questions, send in questions. So those questions have begun, and I figured I'll start the episodes generally now with answering some of those questions, even though they're not necessarily on the topic that I'm going to talk about today. This session is going to be about protecting your idea, but the question I got from one of the listeners, I'm going to read it to you because I think it's pertinent and I think it's a question that a lot of people have. So I think it's worth addressing. He writes, "Hey Jeff, I've really enjoyed the series so far and I've watched every episode the second it comes out. I'm a 22-year-old filmmaker and I'm currently gearing up to start financing my first feature later this year, so I've been carefully evaluating all of my options. My question is as follows. If I want to do a mix of talking to Uncle Charlie and an equity crowdfunding campaign like you described in your previous episode, what are some of the legal and other considerations I should keep in mind? I'm worried about the overlap between the two different financing methods. Again, thank you so much for making these videos. They've been super helpful. I have a few more specific questions, but I'll send you those in another email." Okay, so this listener writes basically is saying they want to start their financing model and they're thinking about an equity crowdfunding campaign, which, as I described in a previous episode, equity crowdfunding is when you are going to give away partial ownership of your film. So all of the people who donate to the crowdfunding campaign, they're not actually donating, they're investing. Remember I said reward crowdfunding is a donation, but equity crowdfunding is an investment. So if you set up this equity crowdfunding campaign and you start giving away ownership, partial ownership of the movie, then his question is, can I also bring in private investors, i.e. he says Uncle Charlie, meaning private investors, in addition to the equity crowdfunding campaign, or will those two be conflicting ideas? Will those business models conflict with each other? So it's a great question, and thank you for sending me that. They can be conflicting, or they cannot be conflicting if you set it up properly. So here's how I'm going to suggest. If you want to do both, it's very easy to get around it. And there's two ways you could do it. One would be you set up your equity crowdfunding campaign and you ask your private investors, you ask your Uncle Charlies to invest through that equity platform. That's kind of the easiest way to do it. You say to all Uncle Charlies, I've set up an equity crowdfunding campaign on this platform and I really want you to be part of it. Can you please go to the platform and invest the amount that you're comfortable with on that platform? And of course, they will get their share, whatever they invest in, and it'll be done all property through the equity platform that you've done. So that's the quickest and easiest way to do that. Just invite all of your private investors to go through that portal, that platform, the equity crowdfunding platform. Now, the only downside to that, and it's not really a downside, is that you're going to pay a fee, obviously, to the platform that you wouldn't otherwise pay if you take their money directly. And there'll be, a couple of other steps that they have to take to be qualified investors, to get set up on that platform, to do those kind of things. So there's some extra steps involved, but it's not a big deal. So it shouldn't be a deterrent. That's not a big problem. The other way to do it, so that's the easiest and quickest way to do it. The other way to do it would be to say on your equity crowdfunding platform, you say that maybe, and I'm just going to give an example, so I'm making up numbers, but you can use whatever numbers you want. I'm going to raise, I need, say, $1 million. I'm going to raise half of that money on the platform through this equity crowdfunding campaign. $500,000 is going to be raised here, and I'm going to give away, let's say, 40% of the equity of my movie for this $500,000. And then you say to your private investors, privately off the campaign, you say, I'm going to raise $500,000 from you guys because I'm raising the other $500,000 on the equity platform. So I only need to raise $500,000 of my million from you, and I'm giving 40% away to you collectively. So now let's say you've given 40% to private investors, i.e. Uncle Charlie's, in one set of discussions, and then the other 40% to equity crowdfunding investors, for their 500,000. You're left with, say, 20%. So you keep 20% as the producer, and you've given away 80%, 40% here, 40% there. So that means you're not sending your Uncle Charlie's over to the crowdfunding platform. You're taking them directly, but you're only giving them 40%. You're giving these 40%. You're keeping 20%. Again, the numbers don't matter. I just made that number. Those scenarios could be 30, 30, 40, it could be 35, 35, it could be whatever the numbers are that you think are the correct mix to entice your investors and to be fair, to give a fair deal. But that's the other way to do it. Me, because I know how to do all that kind of stuff, would probably do the second way. I'd split the investment. But the easier way to do it would be to just send everybody the equity platform and put them all through that portal, because it's very organized and everybody's qualified and it stays in one place. But either way will do the trick and you won't have any conflicts. Okay, so thanks again for that question. So now let's get into today's episode. So basically, I get a lot of questions primarily from my students and a lot of writers who are first-time, say, filmmakers, or not even first time. They could be, second, third, fourth time filmmakers. And they basically, I have this great idea for a movie, and some of them already have a script, or some of them just have an idea, or some of them have a treatment. It depends. There are different levels of development, but everybody says the same thing. They say, if I share this idea, like if I go out and pitch it to potential investors, or I pitch it to distributors, mostly distributors because they're in the business. Or maybe if you get lucky and you get a pitch with like a big streaming platform or a studio, do I have to be worried that they're going to steal that concept? Like if I tell them the concept and they take it, how do I protect myself from them stealing that concept, making the project without me, and then me getting left with nothing after I've come up with this great idea? And it's a very, very legitimate discussion and concern from everybody who has an idea. Everybody goes through the motions on this. So let me explain this from first a very practical point of view and then a legal point of view. Well, let's start with the legal side, all right? So I'm going to give you sort of the legal analysis of this, then I'm going to give you the practical analysis. Ideas are called intellectual property, all right? It means you've come up with a piece of property that doesn't exist physically. It just it exists in your mind as a sort of an idea, and that's why I call it intellectual property, IP for short. Intellectual property laws are interesting. They're well thought out. They've been, around for centuries and centuries. People have had ideas for centuries. And so a lot of people have put a lot of thought into how to protect these ideas. And they've come up with sort of different streams of thought. So the stream of thought that we have to concern ourselves with is what we call copyright. Copyright is the protection of intellectual property, as opposed to, say, there's other types of protections, like, say, patent or trademark. So these are all intellectual property protections. Say, you have a symbol like the word Coca-Cola, or here on my computer here, this Apple symbol. How do you protect somebody from stealing that? Those are trademarks. Basically, you register them. You register them and you give notice to the world that you have created this and that you are registering it, and they are not allowed to take it from you and use it. It costs a lot of money to do that. Or to register a patent, that type of thing. There's limited time frames. So I'm not going to get into patents and registrations and trademarks and stuff like that. That's for an IP, intellectual property lawyer, if you want to listen to another podcast. But I am going to get into copyright. So copyright basically is the protection of artistic works. All right, let's call it that. Now, what exactly can you protect in terms of an artistic work? So let's start with, you cannot protect an idea. An idea, like you say, I have an idea to make a movie about, two detectives who go on a hunt to find a missing girl who was kidnapped, from her family. That's my idea. That is not protectable. Why is that not protectable? Because thousands of people probably had that idea. And you can't say just because you came up with that idea that you can prevent everybody else from having that idea, because people all around the world have that idea. People who live next door to you have that idea. So you can't protect the idea, but what you can protect is what we call the expression of the idea. So the expression of the idea is not saying what I just said, two detectives who go on a hunt for a missing girl, the mystery thriller type of thing. What you can protect is if you write a script that has that story involved. And the way you express yourself in that script is your expression of that idea. Because the way you're going to express that idea, you're going to choose certain characters with certain character names, with certain dialogue, with certain scenes, and it's going to be a full flushed out script, and it will be very, very sort of subjective to the way you're expressing it. And the more detail and the more comprehensive it becomes, the more protectable it is, because it's clear that you wrote that and somebody else didn't. Now, is it possible that somebody else in another place in the world at more or less the same time wrote the exact same story? Is that possible? Yes, of course it's possible. It's highly improbable that they would choose all the exact same words, all the same characters, all the same stuff like that. It's possible, but highly improbable. So the authorities, the courts, whatever, over time have said that the more you express your idea, the more comprehensively you express your idea, the more likely it is that it's your idea and somebody else didn't write it. Unless, of course, somebody else around the world can say, hey, that you stole my idea. I actually wrote that. You got a hold of it and you re-expressed it. You said it the same way I did. Then they would have to prove to you that they came first, which we'll talk about in a second, all right? So it's only the expression of an idea, and I'm talking about a script, but it could be anything. It could be a painting. If you just sketch something out like a dog and it's very nondescript, you can't really protect that. There's a million dogs in the world, millions. And so, but if you sketch it out with certain eyes and coloring and this and that, and even then it's a breed, but the way you've done it, it becomes more protectable. So the more you express yourself, the more protection you have. And what you can do is you can register the expression of your idea, and that is what you're basically called copyright. You're copywriting the expression of your idea. Now, the minute you create your idea, so let's go back to a script, all right? If it's just an idea, you're not going to be able to protect it. You go and pitch some investors and say, here's my idea, that's not protectable. But if you say, here's my idea and here's a 10-page treatment, or here's a 100-page script, that's very protectable, because that is what you are protecting, your version of that idea. Somebody else has another version of that idea somewhere around the world, they own that. You own your expression of that idea. All right. So the way you're going to protect that is, well, the minute you write it, the minute you write the script and express it, it becomes automatically copywritten, meaning because you wrote it, you own it. Now, the problem is the rest of the world doesn't know that you wrote it and owned it, because only you know that. Or maybe you give it to a friend or something like that. So the way you want to give notice to the rest of the world that you wrote it and own it is you want to register it. And there's various ways to register your works in order to protect them. So here in the United States, probably the most common way to register copyright, which means register giving notice to the world that this particular expression of this idea is yours, you wrote it at a certain time, would be to register it with the Library of Congress in Washington. And they have a copyright office as part of the Library of Congress. And you send in your work. Generally, if it's a script, you're going to send in either the physical script or you're going to send in a disc, digital script version of it. and you go online, and I can't remember what they charge now, $75 or something like that. So you send in your work, you date it, and you're putting the office on notice that was your work at this point in time, and that's when you said it becomes official notice to the whole world by registering at, say, the U.S. Library of Congress. Now, does that mean the whole world knows about it? No, but effectively, these big sort of copyright offices like U.S. Library of Congress more or less act as notice to the whole world because they're a big enough organization. So that's one way of doing it. There are other ways of kind of registering notice. A lot of writers who are members of the Writers Guild of America, the WGA, they have a copyright protection service too, or registration service. So you can actually, send your work into them and say, here's the day, here's my work, here's when I wrote it, here's the time, the date, and they can register it for you. And you pay a fee for them and they put it on file. So it's registered there. You can even, if you want to do the simplest way, a lot of people, what they used to do is just basically print off a copy of their work, or now you'd put it on a disk or like on a hard drive or something like that, or a thumb drive, or even a digital file. And you send it to, say, a lawyer, a third-party lawyer. And you basically say, I'd like you to receive this, and you hold it so that if anybody ever challenges it, you can tell them that I sent it to you at this point in time. Here's the work, the way it was sent, and they can verify that you actually created that work and sent it to them at that point. So basically what you're doing is you're saying, here's my work that I created, that I expressed, my expression of this idea. And at this point in time, I told somebody else. In the case of the Library of Congress, you told, say, the entire United States or the whole world. In the case of a lawyer, you told this lawyer, but that means that you told somebody that it was yours. And then it's basically registered at that point. Now, what happens is after that is a lot of other people more or less come up with the same idea. So let's say that you here in the United States come up with that idea, you express it a certain way, and then somebody in Australia in a similar time frame comes up with a similar idea and expresses it actually in a similar way, like coincidentally, all right? It's not exactly the same, but it's very close. A lot of their plot lines are similar, that type of thing. Maybe even some of their character names are similar, just by coincidence, pure coincidence, all right, which could happen. So the question is, who owns that property? Generally, what they're going to do is first they're going to go to the date which it was registered. So let's say, coincidentally, you both register on the same day, the same time. So they're in Australia, you're in the United States, and you both register at the same time. So they register in their country, at their copyright office, you register here. So then the question is, who does it belong to? That's when it gets dicey. That's when we hit the gray area. If it's a very big property, let's say that is going to be licensed for $1 million from a studio to make a movie, like a script, you're going to have to fight over that. You're going to have to kind of prove, hey, look I spent the last, 6 months of my life staying at home writing the script, and people can verify that I stayed home and wrote it. And as opposed to, I stumbled across this, somebody else had shared it with me and I stole it. So this is where these copyright battles can get a little bit gray. Like, who did what? When did they do it? How much can you prove that it's yours? Now, generally speaking, you're not going to have to get into one of these things because this doesn't arise a lot. It used to arise a lot, and that's because in the studio system, decades ago, it's hard to know what's real or not. But there's lots of famous cases where after a movie gets made by a Hollywood studio, writers come out of the woodwork and say, hey, I created that idea. I wrote that script. I pitched it to them. And, decades ago, there wasn't as much sort of evidence and information there wasn't enough record keeping to know exactly who was right and who wasn't, who was lying and who was telling the truth, or what actually happened. So there's probably lots of cases where the studios did either accidentally or on purpose take somebody else's idea. But there's probably lots of cases where they didn't, where they actually came up with that idea independently, and coincidentally somebody else came up with it or didn't and just said they did and was trying to defraud the studio. So each of these cases has to be determined on their merits and on the evidence. And some of them, are worth a lot of money and can get a little dicey. So that's the legality of the whole copyright system. You can't copyright an idea. You can only copyright the expression of the idea. So if you think you have this crazy unique idea and you don't want to share it with anybody because you think it's so unique, doesn't really matter, because the idea is, unless it's super, super specific and super, super unique, and you express it that way, that it's so beyond different than anything else, it's probably not going to be protectable anyways, until you actually write out in a lot more detail how you're going to express that idea, like characters and plot lines and story arcs and things like that. So that's the legal side of copyright protection. The practical side is this. A lot of writers say, I can't share my idea because I'm worried they're going to steal it from me. Well, I just explained, don't worry about it, because legally it's kind of not your property anyways, because it's just an idea. But realistically speaking, this is a super competitive business. And if you're not sharing with people, then you're kind of handcuffing yourself. You're handicapping yourself, because they need to know that you got something that they're interested in. So you actually have to share stuff, because they're not, look at, if you're a writer, you're either pitching one of two things: that you're a really good writer and you want them to hire you as a writer on one of their projects, or that you are a really good writer and wrote a great project that you want them to license from you, the project. So you kind of have to, and if you want them to pay for you to develop a script and write a script, you kind of have to tell them what they're paying for. Unless, you're a fantastic writer and they say, okay, whatever you write is good with us. But that usually doesn't happen. They usually say, kind of pitch us on the idea, and if we like it, we'll let you write it. And then the writer says, well, if I pitch you and you like it and you don't hire me, then you're going to hire another writer and they're going to write it, and then I'm going to get screwed because they're going to steal the idea and I'm not going to be able to prove. So, there's ways to protect against that too, but it gets very complicated. And the truth be told, that's why a lot of studios and big streaming platforms don't even like to take pitches from writers these days. They don't like to actually receive any unsolicited material, because they're worried that somebody's going to accuse them later that they stole it from them. And maybe once in a while they actually do steal it, but chances are they don't steal it. They just have staff writers or other people who have come up with similar ideas and they're working on a project. A lot of writers say to me, oh, you can't believe I got the most unique idea. And I say, I haven't heard a unique idea in 25 years, So no offense, but how many ideas are truly, truly unique? The expression of the ideas is truly unique, but the idea itself, things have been done over and over and over again. And I'll give you an example, okay? But this was done on purpose. But Romeo and Juliet, that's a classic example I use. Shakespeare is credited with Romeo and Juliet. It's, the story of two lovers, from different sides of the tracks, as I say, who, romantic, tragic, tragedy. So Shakespeare is credited with that. So here's the question I have. The idea of Romeo and Juliet is that you've got, a woman and a man who want to be together, but come from kind of different worlds, the Montagues and the Capulets in this case, and their worlds are feuding and they're not meant to be together, but love can bridge that gap and they come together somehow. Did Shakespeare create that idea? Did he create the idea that there could be a guy from one side of the tracks and a girl from the other who want to be together and society's keeping them apart? I don't know if he created that idea. I mean, Shakespeare, I assume, was a brilliant writer because all the stuff that we've seen from him. But did he create the idea? Maybe he did. It was long ago, but maybe he didn't. Maybe that was just classic literature at the time. I haven't done research on it. And maybe that idea had been done many, many other times in other forms. But Shakespeare called it Romeo and Juliet. He named the characters Romeo and Juliet. He gave them backstories. He gave them families. He gave the world, he created the world around them. So he expressed the idea, so he owns Romeo and Juliet. That was his work of art, his expression of that idea. But does he own the idea of the guy and the girl coming together? No, he does not own the idea. He just owns the expression of that. Now, as we move forward, look at how many times that story has been told with different expressions of it. So just to name a few, West Side Story. West Side Story is Tony and Maria. That's Romeo and Juliet. It's the exact same story. Tony's from one side of the tracks, Maria's from the other gang. These are feuding gangs. These two are not meant to be together, but love is going to bridge the gap. It's the exact same story. It's just told differently. It's told with different character names. It's told different settings. It's New York City as opposed to wherever, Italy, where Romeo and Juliet took place. It's different families. It's different. It's the context of it is different, but the story is the exact same. Did the people, whoever wrote West Side Story, I forget who it is, did they have to get that license? Did they have to get permission from Shakespeare to tell that story? No, because Shakespeare didn't own that concept. But they can't call them Romeo and Juliet, probably. Maybe they can if they want to push the envelope, because it's public domain now, which is a whole other discussion. We'll talk about that maybe later. But the idea that you can take the same concept and write another story around it is fine. So that's, being done. Now, I'll give you another example, like the same thing. So Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story, more modern Greece. Greece is Danny and Sandy. All right, Danny's a greaser. Sandy's this nice, prep pretty girl, like innocent girl from Australia or wherever she's set. All right, and it's set in a high school. It's the exact same story. All right, Danny, is Tony from West Side Story, and Sandy is Maria. It's just a different context. Again, same idea, different story. Even more recently, High School Musical. All right, High School Musical, same thing. I forget their character names, but one is the athlete and the other is the science geek. The girl's the science geek, the guy's the athlete. I know Zac Efron, I forget, what their character names were. But same story, exact same story, crossing the line. Can the athletic jocks hang out with the science geeks, or is that going to cross the line and they have to become one or the same? Same exact story. Okay, done in a completely different context. This one, Grease and High School Musical are both musicals. Actually, they're all musicals. What am I talking about? Obviously, I don't know if Romeo and Juliet was, but obviously West Side Story was. So the idea, what I'm saying is you can't protect that idea, but the expression changes over and over and over again. So now the question becomes, what happens if somebody on the other side of the world writes Grease at the same time whoever wrote it on this side of the world was writing it? Then they have to determine who really came up with those concepts. Did somebody steal from the other? Did they hear about it? Was it a complete coincidence? And that's the way it works on the legal side. On the practical side, my suggestion to you is don't worry about it. You know what? If you want to get the job done, you want to pitch people on your concept and you want to get them involved and maybe finance or help you out or even accept your story, you got to take a chance. And because if you don't take a chance, they're not going to know what you're bringing to the table. And without that, there's nothing to talk about. So if you really want to be careful, then before you pitch an idea, write something out with a lot more detail. But the minute you do that, that becomes the expression of your idea. So if, say, during the pitch, you say to them, hey, I've got this idea where a guy and a girl are going to get together in a high school, but he's going to be from the Greasers and she's going to be, the pretty girls or the pink ladies or whatever, and that's all you got, that might not be enough to protect the concept. Maybe it will be. But then somebody else comes along and gives it a little bit more detail. And he's going to be involved in, building this car, and she's going to be involved in, doing this and that kind of thing. And so the more detail you get, the more accurate and the more protectable it becomes because the expression becomes greater. But if you want to succeed and you want to move forward with your ideas, and they're only ideas, you're going to have to share them and you're going to have to take a chance. All right. And the reason I say, practically speaking, don't worry about it too much is, and I hate to say it because it sounds terrible, but chances are your idea is not actually original. There's probably been lots and lots of other people who've had the exact same idea. They haven't gotten it over the finish line because having an idea is a lot more different than having a finished script and a finished movie. But I guarantee you, if you were to canvass, 1 million people in the world, at least 10,000 of them would have the same ideas. It's just the way it is. How many will actually write a script? How many will register? How many will get a movie made? Not many, but a lot of people will have the same idea. So at some point, if you want to move forward, you got to take some chances. You got to trust people. And can you get screwed? If you think that somebody taking an idea that you don't own because they had the same idea, or you told them about it and now they have that idea, if that to you is getting screwed, then it's going to be tough to move forward in this business. It's just, that's what goes on. And you kind of have to put yourself out there and take some ideas. Unless, if you don't want to take those chances, then take the time and invest the time and the money, whatever you need, to actually have your idea flushed out and express it in as detailed a manner as possible. And then that becomes your copyrightable property. But if you change it, if you make gigantic changes to it because you've had discussions with somebody else, or somebody says, hey, you should do this, this, and this, then all of a sudden that's not copyrightable anymore, because now you're about to change the expression of it. So every time you change the expression, it becomes a new property if it's changed, significantly enough to change directions or storylines or story arcs or that type of thing. But you got to take some chances. I've never worried about people stealing ideas. And again, at the indie film level, okay, at the big studio level, maybe there's more concerns. But at the indie film level, starting with a property and idea is super important, but that's not the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is getting the money to get it made. So pitching a lot of people on your idea and getting them excited about it is great. I think that the people you're pitching on the indie side, like Uncle Charlie and all the private investors you're going to go to, they're not interested in stealing your idea because they're not in the movie business. All right. They're just people who want to help you, or maybe, get involved with financing. So pitching to them shouldn't be that big a problem, because they're not in the business and they don't want to do what you want to do, which is get a movie made. So I think it's important to actually pitch to them and share your ideas. Listen, once in a while, is somebody says, hey, that's such a great idea, I'm going to go into the movie business and I'm going to pitch it and get it made. It's possible. It could happen. It probably has happened. But I'm going to say more times than not, it doesn't happen that way. You find people who you get excited, and then they're willing to get behind you after you get them excited about your idea. But if you really, really want to be, very careful, then write it out first. Express it in as much detail as possible, and then you don't have to worry about it. And register it. You still may have to fight with somebody who says that they did the exact same idea at the exact same time as you, but you'll have a much better chance of proving your case and succeeding if that's, what you want to do. But if you're going to do something on spec and you just have an idea, and like so many students of mine and so many indie filmmakers say to me, I'm not going to share my idea. It's such a good idea that I don't want to give it away. And I say, okay, well, then chances are you'll never get over the finish line. You'll never get anything made, because your idea is really probably not that unique. And how are you going to get to the next step of somebody funding you writing a script if you don't even want to share your idea with them? So just go write your own script and then share that with them. All right, so that's how it works. And that's obviously the way I see it. I've shared lots of ideas with people. I've never had anything stolen that I believe they stole that didn't already exist, in whether their own idea or something like that. And I've had some unique ideas. But whenever I've been concerned about losing an idea or somebody stealing it, I express it. I never say the idea without giving, say, at least a 10-page treatment of it. So at least there might not be a full developed script, but it would be a pretty developed treatment, an outline that gives directions and plot points and character names and stuff like that. So that is a little bit more protectable than just the idea. Now we're going to end with one last concept that I mentioned earlier called public domain. So when an idea or a property is being out there for a long, long time, let's take Romeo and Juliet, for example. And I can't remember exactly. I think that when a property has been in the public domain, meaning that it was written by an author, and then 75 years after the death of the author. So if the author's still alive, they get to own their property for the whole time that they're alive. But then after they die, they have 75 years where their estate owns the property. And then after that, it goes into the public domain, meaning nobody owns it anymore. So people now say Shakespeare has been dead for, a couple centuries. So Romeo and Juliet now is public domain, unless somebody else registered it and took it over, but I don't think that's the case, all right? So now everybody can stage Romeo and Juliet without paying royalties, or they can, talk about the property or do whatever they want, make movies about it, because now that property is available to everybody. So you can't protect a property forever. You can only protect it for a certain amount of time, and I believe and again, I might be wrong with this, but it's the lifetime of the author plus an additional time frame, and I think it's 75 years. In the case of, say, like a written play or a story, or maybe not a movie, maybe the movie Romeo and Juliet can be protected longer, but the play itself, Shakespeare's play, there are time limits on the protection that you get. Again, if you're really, really concerned about this, you should look up copyright laws in your own country and or around the world, because generally countries collaborate with each other so that we can protect properties worldwide, because we don't want one country having one set of laws and another country not. So we these copyright sort of protections bridge most of the world. Some people don't cooperate, obviously, but most people do, because everybody's got the same concern about people stealing each other's artistic works, their intellectual property. So that's how that works, and choose what's best for you. Don't lose too much sleep over this, but choose what's best for you. If you're the worrying type, then give yourself extra protection. If not, then do what you need to do to get your property made and over the finish line. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to email them to me at jdeverett@deverettmedia.com, and please push subscribe and follow the podcast, and I'll see you next time.